The Zyphran Empire was vast, stretching across countless star systems. Ruled by a powerful and ancient emperor, Khazarath, his empire was one of the most feared in the galaxy, and he himself was considered a near-immortal being of strength, wisdom, and cruelty. The Zyphrans were a race of towering warriors, unmatched in their battle prowess. They believed in the supremacy of their kind, and they revered dragons mighty, fire-breathing beasts that were as old as the stars themselves. These dragons were not only powerful creatures, they were symbols of the emperor's dominance and divine right to rule. But despite the power of his empire and the reverence that his people held for him, Emperor Khazarath had one great disappointment: his dragon hatchling, Zevra. The creature was born weak, frail, and sickly, unlike the other dragons that the emperor had raised throughout his long reign. Zevra was small, with scales that lacked the radiant shine of strength, and eyes that seemed to show more confusion than the fierce loyalty Khazarath had expected. It had been several weeks since Zevra's birth, and still, it couldn't perform any of the mighty feats of strength or mastery of fire that the emperor had anticipated. Worse, it refused to bond with the emperor through the telepathic connection that dragons shared with their masters. Khazarath had tried everything. He'd spent hours attempting to connect with the hatchling, urging it to obey his thoughts, his commands. Yet, Zevra only looked up at him with uncertain eyes, as though not understanding the emperor's frustration. This was a failure, and Khazarath was not used to failure. The whispers had started soon after Zevra's birth. Those close to the emperor murmured that he was no longer the mighty ruler he once was, that his power was slipping, that even his dragon was refusing to heed him. And so, on the day that would seal Zevra's fate, Emperor Khazarath stood before his royal court in the grand hall of the imperial palace, his towering figure casting a long shadow over the gathered lords and generals. "I have raised dragons since my youth," Khazarath announced, his voice booming across the marble hall. "All of them have been magnificent, fierce, and loyal. But this one, this hatchling is worthless." He glanced at Zevra, who lay curled up at his feet, looking up at him with soft eyes. "It does not obey. It does not understand the greatness it could achieve. Perhaps it was never meant to be." The court fell silent. The Zyphrans respected strength above all, and an emperor's word was law. For Khazarath to speak so disdainfully of his own dragon was a rare thing, and the room was filled with tension as the court members exchanged nervous glances. They were afraid of what this meant for the future of the empire. What good was an emperor who could not even control his own dragon? Among the royal court, a quiet figure stood, unseen by most. Leo Marlowe, a Humyn barber. He had been captured during a recent raid on a Humyn colony, a people that the Zyphrans considered inferior. The humans were weak, small, and their technology was primitive compared to the might of the Zyphran Empire. Leo had been brought to the palace as a slave to serve the royal family, his skills as a barber now used to trim the hair of the Zyphran elite. To him, the emperor's fury seemed far beyond his station, but as he stood silently in the corner, he could not help but watch the young dragon. Zevra's eyes, large and vulnerable, caught his gaze. There was something in the way the hatchling looked at Leo, something that made the human feel a spark of sympathy. It was as though the dragon, too, knew it was being judged, its worth weighed and found lacking. For days after that fateful speech, Leo went about his work as usual. He tended to the royal families, hair with precision, trimming and cutting, silently observing the grandeur of the Zyphran palace. But every time he passed the cage where Zevra was kept, he would glance at the hatchling. He saw how it hardly ate, how it barely moved, how it looked longingly out of its small enclosure. It was as though the emperor's harsh words had broken something in it. But Leo, being a man of quiet nature, did not speak of it. He was a barber, and that was his role. He was human, small, weak, and insignificant in the eyes of the Zyphrans. His people had never been a force to be reckoned with. They were slaves to the Zyphrans, used and discarded like so much fodder in the grand scheme of things. Yet Leo could not shake the feeling that there was something more to the situation. One day, as Leo was sweeping the floor in the hallway near Zevra's cage, he noticed the hatchling's eyes on him. Once more, This time, there was something different in its gaze, a flicker of hope. Without thinking, Leo walked toward the cage. The guards did not stop him, after all. He was just a barber, a servant with no voice in matters of the court. He knelt down slowly, making no sudden moves, and looked at Zevra with quiet eyes. The dragon blinked, its scales shimmering faintly in the dim light. It did not move, but for the first time, it seemed to acknowledge Leo's presence. As though it recognized something in him, Leo reached his hand through the bars of the cage, his fingers gently brushing against the cold scales of the dragon. It was a simple, silent gesture, but it felt significant, as if the world paused for just a moment. Zevra let out a low, soft sound. It wasn't a growl or a hiss, but a quiet whimper, something almost like a plea. Leo's heart tightened. He had been taught to fear the dragons, taught to believe that they were untouchable, beyond the reach of even the greatest Xiphran warriors. But in that moment, he saw only a creature in need of care, a creature whose power had been smothered by the harsh expectations of its emperor. Leo withdrew his hand slowly, knowing that he could not stay too long. The guards would question him, and the emperor would have no patience for such behavior. But as he stood and turned away, he couldn't help but feel that something important had just passed between him and the dragon. Something that might change everything. As Leo resumed his duties, a thought lingered in his mind. Perhaps Zevra wasn't worthless at all. Perhaps it was just misunderstood. And for the first time since his capture, Leo began to wonder what his own role in the Empire might be. Could he, a mere barber, make a difference in a galaxy ruled by dragons and emperors? Could he find a way to show the Xiphrans what true worth really meant? The answers would come soon. But for now, he kept his silence. The stage was set. The Empire's fate, it seemed, was about to change. Leo Marlowe had never imagined that his skills as a barber would place him in a position of such importance, especially not in the imperial palace of the Xiphran Empire. He was just a human, a slave, nothing more than a servant to be used by the Empire's rulers. But something had changed since his quiet moment with the dragon. Zevra, the creature's vulnerable eyes, had stuck with him, and Leo found himself thinking more and more about the hatchling. For days after his brief interaction with Zevra, Leo went about his work as usual, trimming the hair of the royal family and the nobles of the court. His hands, skilled and steady with scissors and razors, moved with precision and care. He was known for his technique, his attention to detail, and his quiet demeanor, which made him an unusual presence in the chaotic, high-tension atmosphere of the palace. The royal court was a place of intrigue and danger. The Xiphran nobles were fierce, proud, and often scheming for power. Leo, however, paid them little mind. He was a simple barber who focused on his work, never speaking unless spoken to. His task was always the same: cut, trim, shave, and leave. His only comfort came from the few quiet moments in between his duties, when he could steal a glance at the dragon, still confined to its small cage in the corner of the palace courtyard. One afternoon, as Leo finished a trim for one of the high-ranking generals, he was summoned to the emperor's chambers. It wasn't uncommon for the emperor's personal attendants to call on him for grooming duties. But this was different. Leo had heard whispers in the halls that the emperor was growing increasingly frustrated with Zevra's lack of progress. The hatchling had failed yet another attempt at training, and the court's patience was wearing thin. Khazarath had made it clear that Zevra's future was uncertain. His words had been harsh, and the dragon, once again, had been declared worthless. Leo felt a pang of sympathy for the creature. There was something in him, some small voice that told him Zevra was not beyond hope, not truly worthless as the emperor claimed. But Leo was just a barber. His opinion meant nothing in this palace, where power and fear ruled all. When Leo arrived at the emperor's chambers, he was greeted by Khazarath's personal attendants, who led him to the royal throne room. The emperor sat upon his throne, a towering figure of power, his crimson robes flowing like liquid fire. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned Leo as the human knelt before him. "You," the emperor said, his voice low and dangerous. "You will tend to me today. I've heard that your skill is impressive." There was a hint of condescension in his words. but also something else, something like a challenge. Leo had never been one to rise to challenges. He simply did his work, as was expected of him. But something in the way the Emperor spoke made him hesitate. It was as if the Emperor had something else in mind. "I shall begin immediately, my Emperor," Leo said, his voice steady. He didn't look up, instead focusing on the task at hand. His hands, practiced and confident, moved with precision as he began to trim the Emperor's hair, cutting each strand with care. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. The Emperor remained still, his piercing gaze watching Leo's every move. "You know, Humyn," Khazarath began, his tone unexpectedly soft, "I've heard much about your kind. I know your people are weak, insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. But I am curious. Why do you not fear us?" Leo felt a shiver run down his spine at the Emperor's words. He knew better than to respond directly to such a question. But the curiosity in Khazarath's voice made him wonder if perhaps, for the first time, the Emperor was seeing something different in him. "I do not fear you, my Emperor," Leo said quietly, keeping his eyes focused on his task. "I simply do my work." There was a pause, and then Khazarath let out a low chuckle. "Simple, yes, but you've been brought here as a slave, and yet you carry yourself as if you were more than that. Tell me, Humyn, what makes you think you have a place in my empire?" Leo didn't answer immediately. His hands continued their work, but his mind was racing. The Emperor was testing him, probing for some kind of weakness, some crack in his composure. Leo had no intention of giving him what he wanted. He was not afraid of the Emperor, but he knew the price of defying him. Instead, he chose his words carefully, speaking slowly. "I have no place here, my Emperor, but I do my work well. That is all." For a moment, there was silence. Then, Khazarath leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I have been told that you have an affinity for dragons." Leo hesitated. He had always been aware of the power the dragons held in the Empire, but he had never spoken of them. He had never been in a position to question their place in Xiphran society. I have seen one, my Emperor," Leo said, his voice careful. "Zevra, the hatchling." The Emperor's eyes flashed with irritation. But there was also something else, something like curiosity. "And what do you think of it?" Leo paused, choosing his words with great care. "It is a creature of great potential, my Emperor, but it is misunderstood." Khazarath's gaze hardened. "Misunderstood. It is weak, and it will never live up to the expectations of the Empire. Do you think I am blind to its shortcomings?" Leo did not flinch. He had spent his life around people who underestimated him. It was nothing new. "I do not claim to know what the Emperor sees," Leo said, "but I do know that strength is not the only measure of worth." The Emperor sat back in his throne, his eyes never leaving Leo, for a long moment. The two men locked gazes, the tension between them palpable. Leo had no idea what was going through the Emperor's mind, but he felt the weight of the Emperor's scrutiny. Finally, Khazarath spoke, his voice soft but filled with a dangerous edge. "You are a curious human, Leo Marlowe. Perhaps you are right. Strength alone does not define worth. But I will decide what Zevra's future holds. And if you fail to meet my expectations, there will be consequences." Leo nodded, but in his mind, he already knew what he had to do. He had to find a way to show the Emperor that there was more to strength than brute force. There was something in Zevra that could still be awakened, something that could change everything. And he, a simple human barber, would be the one to show the galaxy that even the smallest of beings could make the greatest impact. With his work finished, Leo bowed and left the Emperor's chambers, his mind racing with plans. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was a road he was willing to walk because for the first time, he believed in something more than himself. And he believed in the dragon, too. In the days that followed Leo Marlowe's quiet conversation with the Emperor, the palace seemed to grow even more tense. The Xiphran Empire was on the edge of something. The Emperor's anger at Zevra's failure was palpable, and whispers filled the hallways. The once proud dragon hatchling was seen as a symbol of Khazarath's growing weakness, and many in the court questioned whether it was time to put an end to the dragon's life. Some even feared that its failure might eventually lead to a loss of faith in the Emperor himself. But in the midst of all the chaos, one Humyn was quietly taking steps that would change the course of history. Leo continued his duties as a barber, trimming the hair of nobles, generals, and anyone else who required his services. He had become a fixture in the palace, a quiet observer of the Empire's inner workings. But his mind was never far from Zevra. The dragon, who had once seemed so weak, had slowly begun to intrigue him. There was something about the way it looked at him that made Leo feel as though there was more to it than just a dragon. There was potential, buried deep beneath the surface. Every chance he got, Leo would steal a glance at Zevra, who was still kept in the small bar cage in the courtyard. The hatchling seemed to have given up trying to please the Emperor, and it no longer reacted to the Imperial guards who came to check on it. But when Leo approached, Zevra's eyes would follow him, a silent, almost desperate plea in its gaze. It had been a week since Leo had first touched the dragon's scales, and since then, he thought of little else. The creature had not changed much, still weak, still confused. But there was something about its presence, something that made Leo feel as if he could do more. Something that whispered to him that he could help it. One evening, after his usual shift, Leo found himself standing in front of Zevra's cage once more. The moonlight shone down, casting a soft glow over the courtyard. The night was quiet, and the usual hustle of the palace had slowed, leaving a peaceful silence in its wake. Leo approached the cage slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to try again. Zevra looked up at him, its large eyes reflecting the moonlight. It was almost as if the hatchling recognized him now, knew him in a way that was beyond mere sight. Leo hesitated for a moment, before reaching out, gently placing his hand through the bars of the cage. The dragon's scales felt cold, but there was a soft warmth in the touch, a spark of life that seemed to radiate from it. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, to Leo's surprise, Zevra lifted its head toward his hand, nuzzling it gently. The act was so subtle, so simple, but it made Leo's heart swell with hope. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The next few days passed quickly, and Leo found himself continuing to visit Zevra whenever he could. He spoke to the dragon, in quiet, soothing tones, telling it stories of human life, of the simple things, the mundane moments that made life worth living. He talked about the way the sun rose over Earth's oceans, the sound of the wind through the trees, and the way a good meal could bring a person peace. Leo didn't know why he felt compelled to do this, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Zevra needed to hear something beyond the cold, harsh commands of the Emperor. And slowly, something started to change. One evening, Leo was called to the Emperor's private chambers again. This time, it was not for grooming duties. Instead, the Emperor himself was waiting, sitting in the center of the room, his piercing gaze fixed on Leo. There was something different in Khazarath's demeanor, something cold, but also calculating. "Come closer, Humyn," the Emperor ordered. Leo obeyed, stepping forward and kneeling before the Emperor, his heart racing. There was no telling what the Emperor had planned, but Leo had no choice but to face it. The Emperor's sharp eyes studied him, as if he was measuring every part of Leo's soul. The tension in the room was thick, and Leo could feel the weight of Khazarath's gaze pressing down on him. "You spent quite a bit of time with the dragon, haven't you?" Khazarath's voice was low. "Dangerous." Leo swallowed hard, but he didn't break eye contact. "I've only done what I could, my Emperor." The Emperor raised an eyebrow. "You think you can make a difference? A human, who is barely more than a slave, thinks he can do something my Empire's greatest warriors could not." Leo didn't flinch. He'd heard the Emperor's words before. Humans were weak. They were nothing in the eyes of the Zyphrans. But this time, he felt something inside him stir. Something deep within his chest. "I think Zevra is not beyond help," Leo said quietly. "I think it just needs something different, something the Emperor cannot give." Khazarath's face darkened, but he didn't speak for a long moment. He just stared at Leo, as if weighing his words. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Very well, Humyn. If you believe the dragon can be saved, then prove it. I'll give you one last chance." Leo felt a rush of adrenaline. The Emperor had given him a challenge, one that Leo wasn't sure he could win, but it was his only chance. His only chance to show the galaxy that there was more to strength than power, that there was a kind of power and kindness and understanding. The Emperor's voice broke through his thoughts. You will train the dragon. If it fails once again, it will be put down. I expect results, Leo Marlowe. Show me that I was wrong about you. Leo nodded, his resolve strengthening. I will, my Emperor. With that, the Emperor dismissed him. Leo stood and turned to leave, his mind racing. This was it. There was no turning back now. That night, Leo went to Zevra's cage as usual, but this time, he had a plan. He had to show the dragon that there was strength and trust and patience. And in the quiet moments that the Zypherns had never taught it to value, when Leo reached the cage, Zevra was waiting for him, its large eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. This time, Leo didn't hesitate. He reached inside the cage. Feeling the cool scales beneath his fingers, slowly, he guided the hatchling out of the cage. Letting it stand on the ground in front of him, Zevra seemed hesitant at first, but when Leo gently patted its head, the dragon made no move to pull away. It looked at Leo with an expression that was almost curious, as if wondering what would happen next. Trust me, Leo whispered, and with that, something inside Zevra shifted. It was as if the dragon finally understood that it was a small step, but it was the beginning of something big. Leo could feel it in his heart. Zevra was awakening, and together, they would prove that even the most underestimated beings could achieve greatness. The Zyphern Empire was a place where failure was not tolerated. It was a world built on strength, dominance, and ruthless efficiency. And in this empire, the Emperor's word was law. So when Emperor Khazarath finally declared that Zevra, his own dragon hatchling, would face a public trial, no one doubted the seriousness of the moment. The grand hall was packed with noble families, generals, and warriors. The air was thick with tension, and the sounds of whispers filled the room as the guests waited for the trial to begin. It was the Emperor's way of proving his control over the dragon. If Zevra succeeded, perhaps the Empire would breathe a little easier. If Zevra failed, it would be the final proof that Khazarath had been wrong to place his faith in the creature. And there would be no mercy. Leo Marlowe stood in the shadows of the hall, his heart racing. He had been called to attend the trial, though he had no true place among the Zyphern elite. He was still a slave, a human, small and insignificant in the eyes of the Zypherns. Yet, he knew this trial meant more than just Zevra's life. This was a test of everything he had worked for, everything he had believed. Leo had spent weeks working with Zevra in secret. The bond between them had grown stronger, day by day. The hatchling had started to show signs of life. Its movements were less hesitant, its eyes more focused. But Leo knew that the true test would come today. The Emperor had made it clear that if Zevra did not perform, it would be put down. The trial began with a series of physical challenges. A massive, towering creature from the Zyphern homeworld, known for its immense strength and battle prowess, was brought into the arena. The beast had claws the size of daggers, and its roar shook the very walls of the hall. Zevra was expected to face this creature alone. The dragon's legs wobbled as it stepped into the arena, still weak and fragile from its years of neglect. The crowd fell silent, watching with bated breath. The Emperor, seated high on his throne, looked down with a cold, calculating gaze. Zevra faltered as it saw the beast, its body tense, unsure of what to do. It had never faced anything like this. For a moment, it seemed like the dragon might shrink back, might turn and flee. But then Leo stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't let this happen, not after everything they had been through. Zevra, Leo called, his voice carrying through the hall. The dragon turned its head, its eyes locking onto his. There was something in that gaze, something that told Leo the dragon was listening, that it could hear him. He could feel the connection they had built together, the trust that had grown between them. You don't have to fight alone, Leo said, his voice steady. You're not worthless. You've got this. I believe in you, the crowd gasped. No one had ever spoken to a dragon like this before, not even the Emperor himself. But Leo didn't care. This was Zevra's moment, and if anyone was going to help the dragon, It had to be him. With a deep breath, Zevra stepped forward again, its wings flaring slightly as it spread them wide. The beast in front of it snarled, ready to charge, but Zevra did not retreat. It took a hesitant step forward, then another, until it was close enough to the beast to make its move. The battle was fierce. Zevra was small compared to the war best, but it was faster, more agile. For the first time, Leo saw the dragon use its instinct quick strikes, sudden movements, and the ability to evade the beast's deadly claws. The crowd watched, stunned, as the once weak hatchling fought with a fire Leo had never seen before. It wasn't about strength. It wasn't about being the biggest or the toughest. It was about trust, about believing in itself and its connection with Leo. With each move, Zevra grew more confident, more in control. The war beast's attacks became slower, more predictable, as Zevra danced around them, landing precise blows when it could. The fight lasted for what felt like an eternity. The beast was a relentless force, but Zevra was quick, dodging and countering with movements that seemed almost graceful. The crowd had gone silent, watching in awe as the dragon displayed a strength that no one had expected. And then, with a final, powerful move, Zevra leaped into the air, its wings beating hard. The warbest roared as the dragon landed on its back, claws sinking into its thick hide. With a final twist, Zevra struck at the creature's neck, and it collapsed to the ground, defeated. For a moment, there was silence. The arena was still, the only sound the heavy breathing of the dragon as it stood over its fallen opponent. The crowd was stunned. They had seen the impossible. Zevra had won. Khazarath, the emperor, remained unmoving on his throne, his face unreadable. The Sci-Fi nobles shifted nervously, unsure of what to say. Had they just witnessed a miracle? Or had they underestimated the potential of something they had written off as weak? Zevra stood tall, its wings flaring slightly as it surveyed the arena. It was still weak, still small, but it had done something no one thought possible. It had fought and won. Leo felt his chest swell with pride. This was the moment. This was the moment that would change everything. But just as the crowd began to murmur in awe, Khazarath stood from his throne. The emperor's voice rang out, sharp and cold. As he addressed the arena, it seems, he began, his tone betraying no emotion, that my faith in you was not entirely misplaced. Zevra, the dragon, lowered its head slightly, as if acknowledging the emperor's words. But Leo knew better. This wasn't just about proving itself to Khazarath. This was about proving its worth to itself. And Zevra had done that. Khazarath continued, his eyes narrowing as he glanced down at Leo. And you, Humyn, he said, his voice dark and heavy, have shown that there is more to this dragon than I thought. I admit, I was wrong to underestimate you. Leo's heart skipped a beat. The emperor was acknowledging him, acknowledging his role in Zevra's success. But there was no time for celebration. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The emperor's voice cut through the air again. But remember, Humyn, this is only the beginning. If you fail me again, there will be consequences. Leo bowed his head respectfully, but inside, he knew something had changed. Zevra had proven itself not to the emperor, but to the entire empire. And Leo? He had proven that even the smallest of beings could change the course of history. And as the crowd erupted in cheers, Leo felt the weight of the emperor's gaze on him. But this time, it didn't matter. Zevra had awakened, and the Sci-Fi Empire would never be the same. The cheers of the crowd still echoed in the grand arena, a thunderous applause for the unlikely victor. Zevra, the once weak dragon, stood proud and victorious over the fallen warbest, its wings spread wide and its chest heaving. The crowd was in awe, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. No one expected the frail, fragile dragon to defeat such a powerful creature. Yet, there it was standing strong, its scales glistening in the light, for Leo Marlowe. The sight of Zevra's victory was more than just a triumph in the arena. It was a moment of validation, a moment that proved everything he had worked for. The quiet trust between him and the dragon, the bond they had forged, had finally paid off. He had always believed in Zevra, even when no one else did. And now, everyone could see what he had seen. the dragon wasn't worthless. It was a force in its own right. As the arena cleared and the excitement began to fade, Leo remained standing in the shadows, watching Zevra. The dragon looked back at him, its eyes full of a quiet gratitude that Leo could not ignore. For a moment, everything felt right. The path ahead was uncertain, but Leo felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had done it. He had helped the dragon find its strength, and in doing so, had proven his own worth. But the battle was far from over. The Emperor, Khazarath, had not yet spoken in public since Zevra's victory. The crowd waited, the tension palpable. Would the Emperor acknowledge the dragon's achievement? Would he finally accept the fact that Zevra was not the failure he had once thought? Or would he brush it aside as a mere stroke of luck? Khazarath's figure finally rose from his throne, his eyes scanning the room with cold, calculating intensity. The room fell silent, every eye on the Emperor. He had not moved much during the trial, but now he stood tall and regal, his crimson robes flowing like liquid fire. Zevra, still standing in the center of the arena, lowered its head in respect as Khazarath's gaze fixed upon it. The Emperor's voice rang out, his tone powerful and commanding. "It seems," he began, "that my faith in this dragon has not been entirely misplaced. Today, Zevra has proven itself in battle." His voice was measured, but there was a hint of something else beneath the surface. A grudging respect, perhaps, but just as the crowd began to murmur with approval, Khazarath's gaze shifted to Leo, the human who had dared to challenge the Empire's beliefs, the one who had believed in the dragon when no one else did. "You, Humyn," the Emperor said, his tone still cold but with a new weight behind it, "have done something remarkable. You've trained this creature when no one else thought it could be done. You have proven that there is more to strength than raw power." Leo stood motionless, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment. The Emperor, who had once dismissed him as nothing more than a servant, was acknowledging him. A small part of him wanted to smile, but he held it back. The Emperor was not a man to be pleased easily, and this acknowledgement was not a gift, it was a warning. "I do not forget those who defy me," Khazarath continued, his eyes narrowing as they fixed on Leo. "You have shown me something that no one else has. You have proven that even a human can have a part to play in the future of this empire. But remember, Humyn, you have only just begun." Leo bowed his head respectfully, his mind racing. The Emperor's words were both a recognition of his success and a veiled threat. Leo knew better than to become too complacent. The Empire was built on power, and Khazarath was not the type to forgive easily. Yet, as the Emperor's gaze softened, just for a moment, Leo felt a surge of hope. Something was changing. The Empire, the court, and the galaxy itself were beginning to see what he had known all along. Humans had more to offer than anyone had ever believed. Zevra's victory had been just the beginning. The bond between the dragon and the human was growing stronger, and now, more than ever, it seemed like the two of them were the key to something greater. The Sci-Fi Empire, with its obsession with power and dominance, had always underestimated the potential of other species. But Leo had shown them something different. The crowd began to cheer again, their voices rising in a collective roar. For the first time in what felt like ages, the air was filled with hope. Zevra had done the impossible. It had proven that even the most underestimated creatures could rise to greatness. As Leo stepped forward, he felt the weight of the moment settle on him. He was no longer just a barber, no longer just a slave in the Sci-Fi Empire. He had a place here. He had proven that there was more to strength than power. And as for Zevra, the dragon had shown that there was more to a creature than just physical might. There was spirit, there was heart, and there was the ability to change the world. The Emperor, standing tall before them all, spoke again. This time, his voice carried the weight of something more than just a command. It carried the weight of a new understanding. "You will be my advisor, Leo Marlowe," Khazarath declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "Your wisdom, your strange belief in the impossible, is what this empire needs. I do not trust easily, but you have earned your place. The future of the empire may be uncertain, but with you by my side, perhaps we can build something more than just strength." Leo's heart skipped a beat. This was not a position he had ever imagined for himself. The Emperor's offer was one of great power and responsibility. It was a chance to shape the future of the Empire, a chance to make a real difference. But Leo knew this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead. There always were in a galaxy, ruled by ruthless beings like Khazarath. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He had proven that a human could make a difference. And with Zevra by his side, he knew they could do anything. As the Emperor's words settled in, Leo looked at Zevra, who stood by his side, its wings fluttering slightly as if in acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Together, they had changed the course of history. Together, they would reshape the future of the Xiphran Empire. The crowd's cheers faded into the background, but Leo didn't need to hear them. He had already won. And the galaxy, for the first time, would listen.